All right. Welcome, everyone. Whoever has joined our stream today or watching it afterwards. I'm Lori Lalonde, founder of Her Executive Ascent. I spent 30 years in corporate watching women get left off the ladder, and now I'm spending the next 30 making sure that doesn't happen again. Now, today we're here to talk about one of the biggest skills gaps that leaders have today with regards to AI literacy and governance. And that's what we're here to talk about. Let me introduce Sage. She is my good friend. We had met at Microsoft and had stayed in contact ever since. She has built two multi-million dollar companies, both focused on AI, and has helped hundreds of organizations use AI to drive growth. So thank you for joining us today, Sage.
Yeah, thanks for having me here. We've really seen the AI landscape through so much change together in the time that we've known each other. It's honestly crazy to think about how much the business world has evolved in the last decade and a half. Like, we were talking about the dawn of chatbots a few years ago, and now we're talking about fully agentifying entire businesses. So, a lot of change. And with that, a lot of the challenges that come with understanding the pace of evolution of AI. I think what we're talking about here today is a super important problem that affects every single organization and every single leader, and that's the AI decision trap, which everybody is currently facing. Whether you are an individual contributor who's trying to figure out how do I use AI in my work, or you are someone who is, leading a team or leading an entire company, you're all being faced with that question of, should I use this thing? What is the benefit of using this thing? And how do I not fall into the trap of the shiny new object that looks like it's going to solve all my problems, right?
Absolutely. And yeah, that takes us into that first step of what happens when companies chase AI for the sake of AI.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, that's a big thing right now. The AI for the sake of AI. Many organizations have this like inherent or I guess instinctive knowledge that AI is something we need to do, right? And we see it all over the place. In my last business, I saw it all the time. I was working with legal teams and compliance teams, and everyone kind of has this feeling like if I don't do AI, I'm behind. But that is actually not the problem that we want to solve, and that's not the only reason to bring AI in. So if you go to the next slide, we'll talk about why. The data shows that 95% of enterprise Gen AI pilots are delivering no measurable impact on the bottom line. Like, think about that number for a second. 95%? Any other context, we would never accept that.
Yeah, there would be no investment in any other project, in any other case. And yet AI seems to be one that people are, crossing their fingers and hoping and praying that it pans out.
And why do you think that is? Like, why do you think people are willing to accept the level of uncertainty with AI?
I think it's just because we know that AI can, achieve results and can make things faster, more efficient. There are possibilities with it, but the approach that companies are taking in order to bring an AI in and roll it out is it's kind of being done in reverse.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And I think that this idea of knowing that it can help, but not actually being able to connect it to the tissue of your organization, that's an AI literacy problem, right? Like it's a gap, a knowledge gap in what the technology is capable of and what our understanding of that is. Because the vast majority of professionals are not technologically minded, right? We're not coming from a background of computer science like you and I are, or development like you and I are. And a lot of the time, they're bringing AI in without understanding exactly why they're bringing it in. What is the bottom line that we're trying to make a difference on? So in many cases, they don't even have a baseline or benchmarks in place to begin with. And then what you end up having is, bloated multiple layers of AI stacks within an organization where you've got people paying for ChatGPT, you've got people paying for Claude, you've got people using Olama on their machines, you've got some people requesting Mac minis so that they can do like, mega big tasks, but they don't even know what the tasks are going to be. So you end up with people like spending a ton of money, doing a ton of things, and hoping for the best, which is a recipe for disaster.
100%. And I'll add to that. The example that I've seen is let's roll it out internally as far as whether it's Claude or ChatGPT, and we will run a hackathon where everybody just creates their own prompts. There's no
Mhm.
training on what that even means, what a good prompt looks like, what not to put in the AI, what to put in. Nothing around how to use it and ensure you're protecting confidential information of the company. It's just let's have a prompt hackathon and let's build a library and get everybody comfortable with it. But if people don't have an idea of what things they should be automating away, then they're spinning their wheels for
Mhm.
nothing and they'll achieve no real benefit. So what I tell people is I see it being used as a really expensive email writer in organizations today.
That's true, actually, because a lot of people are using these like high power tools like Claude Cowork to write emails when they don't actually realize that it can do so much more than that. I saw in my last company rulebook, what we did was we built AI for compliance teams. So we actually built like a Gen AI suite that gave some opportunities for people to, interact with the AI directly, but a lot of it was agents that did stuff for them. And the thing that made that successful was people would bring it in to solve a specific problem. And this was what I always help compliance leaders understand was, okay, we're going to sit down and we're going to understand what is your current workflow? Like, what are you doing today and what feels slow? Right? What feels like it's taking too much time that you're sitting in your spreadsheets looking at regulatory tracking, which is extremely boring and extremely tedious. Those are the things that we want to automate. Those are the things that we want to, or that we can see as a good problem for AI to come in and solve. And that's where it becomes a lot more valuable when you know that it's more than just saying, hey, what's the latest on the EU AI Act, for example? And it's actually like, no, let's me and my AI work together to build out a whole new framework for how we implement this in our business. If you want to go to the next slide, we can talk about some of this. I love the framework that you've built around how to like approach this because I think that's a big part of the problem is, and I know this is true for a lot of the groups that you work with, people know that they want to do something, but they don't know where to start. They don't even know like what questions to ask to figure out what is my AI opportunity or what is my problem. So why don't you walk us through what this looks like?
I will. I just want to recap before we get into that piece. What we covered as far as some of the common traps we're seeing organizations get into, because we talked about a lot of different examples, but let's categorize it because it always falls into one of three categories. So we have like the murky return on investment. So that we just talked about. It's let's just roll out AI and see what happens, but there's no real definition of what success looks like. And then we talked about the promise of AI and maybe what we hope it could do, but does that really work in reality? And at the end of the day, I think when you're talking about compliance, we also need to think about, the risk involved in leveraging AI, but no one's really owning it as far as who is going to own the risk when things inevitably go wrong. Because in technology, we know nothing is 100%, nothing is bug free, nothing is perfect. AI is, a great example of that. We've seen a lot of case studies in the news. A lot of articles have come out where it's just gone horribly wrong. So I'd love for you to add to that before we get into the framework.
Yeah. So this is a whole lot of what can go wrong for sure. The outsourced risk, in my opinion, is one of the biggest problems here because when nobody is responsible or accountable for the outcomes of these things, you've just introduced a problem with no solution. And it's not to say that, we want to govern AI so that we don't use AI. That's actually not the thing at all. And so we want to put the right things in place so that we know when something does go wrong, just like with anything. It's not just AI, it's anything. This is why we have business continuity and disaster recovery plans, right? You need to have a plan for what happens if something bad happens. I'm not sure if everyone who's tuning in saw this, but I think there's a fantastic example out of Starbucks Korea that happened recently, which is we won't get into the detail of it because it's quite offensive and honestly horrible what happened. But basically, people were taking suggestions from an AI tool on how to bring out this new marketing campaign. And what they ended up rolling with and approving was something that was incredibly offensive. And I don't know how it got past, multiple layers that should have been in place for saying what is acceptable and not. But it did. It was published, and it ultimately led to the Starbucks CEO in Korea being fired. And the thing here is they're trying to blame it on the AI. They're coming back and they're saying, well, we got it from the AI and it was actually not us who came up with this idea. It was AI who suggested it and we just continued and took it forward. It's like, regardless if AI suggested it, somebody didn't do their job of saying, we are not going to move forward with this. And there's in those moments, there's no difference between if an AI had suggested it or an intern had suggested it or someone had intentionally put it in there because the impact is the same. So we need to have these owners in place. We need to be able to say, here's the system. Here's all of the potential ways that this could go wrong. That's a big part of the question. And when these different pieces might happen, here's who owns the investigation, the recovery plan, and then ultimately who's accountable for that decision being made. On the other notes here, the murky ROI and the unfulfilled promises, like we see this a lot with startups. And there's a big push right now between deciding between do we build it ourselves with AI or do we procure a third party vendor tool, right? One of the challenges that I see a lot with the procurement piece is you don't know how those tools were built either. So you don't know, is this going to be vaporware? Is this somebody who vibe coded this thing themselves that we could get a better job done ourselves? There's so many different layers that have been introduced with the capability of AI. Basically, all of our systems need to mature for how we think about this and how we bring it forward. But, and what it says on the slide here, like the place that we have to start is knowing what questions to ask. And I think we have some suggestions on that, don't we?
Yes, we do. Yes, let's get into it. So, we'll dive a bit deeper into, what types of things and steps you can take in order to ensure that you protect yourself and the organization and really identify if this is something that is ready to move forward with. So if there is an initiative at the company to bring in an AI tool or to, bake it into a product, there are some real questions to ask where you can kind of score it, based on the importance of the question and what it means to the company to assess if it's a go or a no-go. And no-go doesn't mean like completely shut it down. It just means let's pause and fill the gaps. And once we have those gaps filled, we come back and revisit. So these are the basic building blocks around assessing whether to take on this initiative or not. And I feel that this is something that we've done in software development, for decades. But I think with the excitement of AI, a little bit of that has been lost. So let's get into it. So here we are. We have an idea to bring something in, and generally, when we're doing that, we want to assess it for value, fit, and risk. And in order to do that, it's generally you're going to start off with these three high level questions. First of all, to assess the value, ask, is this worth doing? And how would we know? I'll get into the deeper questions of that in a minute, but it's really around assessing the metrics that would be a result of implementing this. So it's not about improving productivity. That's very vague. That doesn't tell me anything. It's about actual numbers. How many hours will be saved? What percentage of efficiency will we see in this process, actual numbers. The next category is fit. So, will it actually work here within our organization based on the reality that we have to deal with day in and day out? So, as you know, vendor demos are clean. They are meant to wow and provide that sizzle and pizzazz and to get you excited about using their product. But they don't have the messy integrations that many large organizations and even some of the mid sized organizations are dealing with today, which is legacy systems, interconnected, business segments and units with data flowing across, data that's not clean. And there are some controls around how the data can be used. So, really, is this something that can reasonably use? Does it fit in with our integrations, with our messy data, and does it still provide the output that we want? So, that's something that where a POC, like a proof of concept or proof of technology, would be relevant in order to answer those questions and really make sure that you know what you're getting into before spending a dollar on these services. And then the last, as we talked about, which is really the most important, is the risk involved. What can go wrong, but more importantly, who owns it? And that is not a generic legal owns it or this team owns it. It's a named person. Who is the senior leader that will sign off before this goes out into production or sign off before it's implemented internally, has done and ensured their team has done the checks and balances and the controls are in place and documented, and that there is a rollback plan. That is the most important part with software, with services, anything. There must be a way to roll it back when things go wrong. because it will.
I could not agree more. And you've reminded me of a decision tool that I learned from when I was working with Amazon many years ago. It's the concept of a one-way door versus a two-way door. A one-way door is one where once you've made the decision, you cannot walk it back. You can't go back through that door, so you're committed to it. A two-way door is one where you can walk through, but you can always decide to go back and close that door and not re-enter. And I always, it's very simple, but I like that as a bit of a tool to say, okay, am I creating a one-way door here? And if I am creating a one-way door, am I comfortable with what the implications may be for my business? For example, if we're talking about, we're going to implement or we're going to choose which provider we use. Are we going to lock into a multi-year contract with OpenAI? That seems like a one-way door for at least 3 years potentially, right? Are we comfortable with that? Well, generally, you should probably say no because the AI landscape is changing so fast. There's always new updates. One day OpenAI is better, the next day it's Claude, the next day it's, DeepSeek or someone entirely new. Or the next day the US government shuts down one of the models that you've been using and now you're locked into something you can't even use. So this is part of the thing for the risk aspect. And then along with that one-way, two-way door, there's the real framework around building that accountability. So I like to use a RACI chart, like who's responsible, who's accountable, who's consulted, and who's informed. And this is not just for these like giant implementations that span a whole organization. It can even be down to a single team, like a marketing team, for example. If we want to go back to the Starbucks example, they should have been thinking, we're using AI here to propose ideas that we're going to put into the real world. Who is responsible and accountable for making sure that what we take from AI is, what matches our brand and our culture? And then who's consulted and informed before we actually go and walk through one of those one-way doors? Those are the types of things that really should be asked. And every single individual needs to, at this point, be thinking with that mindset because we're all moving up a level in the ladder. We're not the doers anymore. We're now the orchestrators of the doers, which is the AI in a lot of cases. And I know not everybody agrees with that, but if you're not thinking like that, you might be one of the folks in your organization who's a bit behind because a lot of people are thinking like that. And it's not always the managers, it's often the people who are the ICs. So you got to at
Yeah.
least understand that they are thinking that way and taking a lot of initiative to do things their own way.
Absolutely. And it's so important at this stage for managers and leaders to listen to the concerns that are being raised, right? It's not about stopping, progress in the company or hindering progress, but it's about ensuring that we've assessed the risk and the people closest to the work, they know the risk related to the work that they're doing. And they generally will voice it initially, but if it's not heeded, then people tend to get quiet. And that gets scary because that's when things can go seriously wrong. So let's look into the questions that we can dig a bit deeper on. So we have these high level questions, but really, how do you flesh out what information you need to make a sound decision on whether to proceed or to pause? So we're going to dig deeper here. In the value section, when we think about value, the high level thing is really like, how do we know that this is going to work for us? And this is when we start thinking a bit deeper. So, really identifying what metrics will change if this works and what's the baseline today. So, really assessing what the current baseline is, what does good look like, and what's the reality, and where in the workflow does that value appear? What does that number tell us? Should we continue or should we stop? So these are the things that you start digging deeper on. And trust me, you can derive as many questions as you need to dig as deep into the value piece as possible as you're assessing the technology. These aren't the only questions, but they're really great starter questions and really fleshing out what's going on and whether this is worthwhile to pursue at this time. From the fit perspective, this is really around understanding who's using it, how often, and when. Like if you are automating away a workflow that's like a monthly workflow that maybe takes someone 10 minutes, is it really worthwhile to automate that away? Is that going to actually cause more overhead? Or are the workflows that you're automating away, even as an example, low value, low impact work? It doesn't contribute to the bottom line, but it takes like 40% time of a single like business analyst, as an example. There is an understanding of what is the time invested to implement this versus the ROI? So, and is the use case for automating waste something that will actually have a sizable impact? Also, thinking about what systems it touches, as I mentioned earlier, thinking about your integrations, your SSO, permissions within, the organization around different systems that it can access. Audit trails and logging are so key to have because I guarantee you, you will have to reference those when things are start misbehaving. And then thinking about the data, is it clean? Is it available? Is it something that we can use? Because this is a compliance risk. You can't just use the data that's there, when you think about like the medical field or when you think about financial services, are protections in place and privacy protections in place. So you may not be able to use specific data in some of your AI workflows. That's a conversation worth having. And then most important is that human checkpoint, assessing the result and does it align with what you're looking for, but also what happens when that output is wrong and how does that get logged and how does that then get slated back into, I guess, the development sprint to go and fix. And then finally, risk, obviously thinking about what are the top ways this can break. It could be 3 ways, it could be 5. Well, there you have it. A real life example of technology failing in real time on our live stream, Chef's Kiss. I think the universe wanted to show that not all technology is infallible, and whether we are live streaming, whether you are using AI, any kind of product at all, there is opportunity for it to fail you at the most critical times. So let me pick up where I left off. We got to the most important part, which was the risk aspect. And we were discussing the ways in which to analyze whether an AI tool is acceptable and ready for use in your organization. So I started off talking about what are the top ways that that AI tool or service can break, or even if you're developing it yourself and you're integrating it into a product. The most important piece of this, though, is who owns the risk. Who decides that they will evaluate the results, sign off on the risk, accept the risk, and this has to be a real person, someone who is actually signing off to say, we are good to go. And they have validated that there is a plan in place for recovery. And speaking of recovery, another thing is how are we going to monitor the quality over time? How are we going to ensure that the output stays consistent? Because we do know that model drift is a thing. And then last but not least, what is the rollback plan? If we need to take this out of production, how quickly and easily can we shut it off and ensure that there is not a disruption to critical services to our users? So those are the key things to think about as you're planning your AI strategy and which AI tools you're using. So this was the point where I was really excited about getting into what this looks like in action, how you would assess value, fit, and risk in a real scenario. So, in a popular case we see happen a lot of times, people are assessing, hey, is there a 24/7 support chatbot we can integrate into our website or into our mobile application so that it can serve users at any time? So, in this case, what are the things that you are assessing when you're identifying if it is a good use case? In this sample scenario, we have where the value that was identified is that it will cut the first response time on the top 20 ticket types, and that's measured in the customer satisfaction surveys and deflection rate. Now, the fit, how does this fit into the organization? Well, the team has identified that, yes, they did run a pilot on the messy data that is in their organization. They didn't run it on a clean demo set, and they ensured that it still was functional and appropriate for use before the rollout. And the way that the risk was evaluated is that in the event that the chatbot serves up wrong answers, which we have seen happen, does anybody remember Air Canada? This has happened in real world. And so in those cases, there is a team and there is a leader who has signed off on this risk and has identified a plan in which human escalation is built in. So in these cases where there was an assessment and there was a measurable value derived from implementing the solution, a confirmed pilot that ran successfully against the messy data and all of the other integrations in the organization, and that there is a leader that is owning the risk and has identified the actions that that team will take in the event of an incorrect output that would require human escalation. So, in those cases, this looks like a go. The takeaway for you today is to be open to the possibilities that AI has to bring into your organization, but ensure that you conduct that due diligence first and use this framework as the first step in laying the foundation to understand whether or not a tool is fit for purpose for your organization, solves a real challenge, and has measurable results and impact, and is being monitored on a regular basis. And as I said, as you start off with those questions, you will dig deeper in each category. The questions could look different from company to company, but at the end of the day, you are looking for ways to measure impact, ensure someone owns the risk, and ensure that the product will work within your organization's various systems. So, where do we go from here? As we talked about, this framework is just the starting point. It is possible to go deeper. And when it comes to AI conversations, this is the first one, but not the only one that you will have. There's so much more work that needs to be done, not just as you're assessing a tool, but understanding how you operationalize it as you bring it in and how your team grows and matures along with your practices. So reach out. We're here to help. You can email me at Lori@herexecutiveascent.com. Last but not least, thank you for your time today. Thank you for your patience. And thank you for having a little bit of humor around our technical difficulties. I hope you've enjoyed this webinar. Subscribe to our YouTube channel because that's where I'll be live streaming probably more often from and posting up new videos regularly. I'm also going to surface our podcast episodes through there. Those are audio only, but I may have some fun video clips to share from time to time. Thank you for being with us today.